What if the scriptures we inherited are not the beginning of the story, but the fragments left after a quiet and deliberate erasure? What if the faiths that shaped civilizations were built upon a library far older, far stranger, and far more dangerous than the polished canon we were taught to trust? Beneath the familiar verses, beneath the translations and revisions, beneath the layers of doctrine, there is a darker current, an undertow of missing pages, forbidden manuscripts, and voices that once thundered across ancient deserts before they were smothered into silence. Imagine whole chapters that named watchers who descended in storms of fire, kings who ruled for lifespans no human could survive, covenants made with beings whose origins were anything but earthly. Imagine testimonies of cosmic wars, primordial floods engineered rather than ordained, and laws delivered by figures whose wings were carved off by later editors. These were not minor side notes. They were the bones of a much older mythos, an inconvenient archive scattered, burned, sealed, or rewritten until only faint echoes remained. And yet, like the shadow of something vast retreating down a long corridor, the traces persist. In monasteries, in desert caves, in fractured tablets, in whispers woven through the oldest Apocrypha. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. For generations, people have opened the Bible believing they were holding a complete archive, an unbroken chain of revelations stretching from the first breath of creation to the final visions of prophecy. Yet the deeper you look into the archaeology of Scripture, the more you begin to sense the presence of something unsettling. A shape behind the text, a shadow behind the canon, like a colossal figure standing just outside the circle of light. The story we inherited is not the full story. It is what survived, what was permitted to survive, after centuries of councils, empires, political pressures, theological rivalries, linguistic reshaping, and outright suppression. And if one dares to sift through what was left behind, a picture emerges that feels less like a tidy religious narrative and more like the excavation of a ruined city whose broken foundations tell a very different tale from the polished monuments above it. Among the fragments that rise from that rubble, none are more haunting than the lost and banned books, texts once revered, once copied, once believed to hold divine authority, yet later exiled to the margins as if they carried a contagion. Some were branded heretical, some were dismissed as myth. Others were buried because they revealed too much, contradicted the dominant version of events, or hinted at a universe that didn't fit neatly inside the walls of doctrine. But all of them, each in their own way, widen the lens. They stretch the narrative beyond what most people have ever been allowed to imagine. Consider, for example, the strange and stirring accounts found in the Book of Enoch, a text so influential in the ancient world that entire theological frameworks depended on its stories. It speaks of beings descending from the heavens, luminous and terrifying, imparting to early humans knowledge that should never have been known. Metalworking, sorcery, astronomy, warfare, beautification, dominion. These weren't metaphors, they were direct transmissions, described with an eerie clarity, as if early scribes were recording encounters not with distant symbolic figures, but with physical intelligences whose presence changed the trajectory of humankind. And why was this book, once cherished by Jewish sects and early Christians alike, later banned, suppressed, and declared dangerous? Because it made the heavens too active, too involved, too present. It blurred the line between divine revelation and something closer to intervention, maybe even colonization. But Enoch is only the beginning. There are other texts, lost chronicles, vanished psalms, prophecies that read like encrypted warnings, hinting that the biblical world was far stranger than the modern versions allow. These banned writings describe pre-flood civilizations ruled by hybrid beings, kings whose reigns spanned centuries or millennia, and wars between factions of celestial entities whose motives were anything but holy. They speak of cosmic cycles, violent resets, migrations of knowledge from world to world, and ancient sanctuaries where scribes recorded events humanity was not meant to forget. And yet those records were torn out, edited beyond recognition, or simply left to decay until the sands of time swallowed them whole. As you wander further into this labyrinth of missing scripture, you start to notice a strange pattern. The erasures are not random. They cluster around three major discomforts: stories that make the divine seem too physical, stories that make humanity seem too old, and stories that make knowledge seem too dangerous to trust the public with. Every removed chapter, every forbidden verse, every suppressed manuscript sits at the intersection of those themes, as if entire councils labored to reshape reality into a version that was easier to control, easier to teach, easier to contain. One of the most chilling examples comes from the so-called Book of the Wars of the Lord, a mysterious text briefly mentioned in Numbers, but now completely lost. The canonical Bible acknowledges its existence, but not its contents. Imagine that. A book cited in Scripture itself, yet erased from history, like referencing a classified document you expect the audience to know, only to later pretend it never existed. Scholars believe the missing book may have recorded supernatural conflicts, battles between divine beings, clashes of titanic forces that shaped the land. Perhaps it was too vivid, too raw, too close to an older mythological memory the later editors wanted to bury. Or perhaps it described events that could not be easily reconciled with the sanitized theology of later centuries. Whatever the reason, it vanished. Not lost accidentally, lost conveniently. Then there is the Book of Jasher, a cryptic work also cited in the Old Testament. The existing version is a patchwork, likely restored from fragments far older than the medieval manuscripts that preserve it. Yet even in its fractured form, it hints at an expansive world where angels walk the earth, where primordial catastrophes reshape continents, where divine beings mingle with mortals, and where ancient heroes possess knowledge that seems almost technological. Why remove it? Why reduce its stories to illusions? Because Jasher crosses boundaries the canon was shaped to enforce. It treats the early world not as a spiritual metaphor, but as a living, breathing realm populated by beings whose existence complicates everything. Or take the recently resurfaced fragments of the Book of Gad the Seer, a prophetic text once held alongside Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles. Inside its surviving pages, we glimpse visions of celestial invasions, hidden covenants sealed in light, and doorways between realms. It doesn't read like a simple prophetic message. It reads like a record of encounters, records that imply direct contact with entities capable of bending time, shifting landscapes, and communicating in symbols that transcend any human language. If such a book were widely circulated during the formation of the biblical canon, it could have destabilized the entire structure of emerging orthodoxy. And these examples are only a fraction of the story. Behind them loom even stranger mysteries, apocalypses attributed to patriarchs whose names barely appear in surviving scripture, hymns dedicated to divine beings whose identities were later softened or erased, and laws allegedly given in ages before Moses, laws that imply a lineage of revelation stretching back to a world that predates recorded history. The reconstruction of these banned books is like assembling a puzzle with half the pieces burned. Yet the surviving fragments are enough to reveal the outline of a story far older than Genesis, stretching into epochs when the earth was ruled not by humans, but by watchers, giants, and beings whose power and motives remain obscure. What becomes unavoidable is the sense that something monumental was removed, not in one moment, not in one era, but repeatedly, systematically, across centuries. Whenever an emperor sought unity, whenever a church sought supremacy, whenever a council sought clarity, the knife came out. Manuscripts were clipped, legends were reinterpreted, entire traditions were declared unclean. And slowly, the vast, chaotic, terrifying world of ancient revelation was reduced to a manageable narrative. Yet echoes of the original survive. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, in Ethiopian monasteries, in early Syriac manuscripts, in hidden libraries of desert sects who refused to abandon the older versions, and perhaps most importantly, in the unexplained anomalies within the canon itself. The sudden shifts, the references to missing books, the unexplained beings who appear without introduction, the ancient phrases that hint at knowledge older than humanity. These cracks in the narrative act like windows, brief, fleeting glimpses into a forgotten theological universe. What if the early scribes were not myth-makers but historians? What if the watchers were not metaphors but memories? What if the oldest stories about floods, giants, heavenly wars, forbidden knowledge were not primitive misunderstandings, but the last surviving whispers of a world erased by both time and intent? What if Scripture once documented not just spiritual truths, but encounters with beings whose origins were beyond the earth? And perhaps that is the most unsettling possibility of all, that the Bible we know is not a complete revelation, but a curated one, trimmed not for accuracy, but for safety, a version shaped to protect, to shield, to simplify. But beneath that version lies something older and far more volatile, a story of humanity entangled with powers it barely comprehended. As we begin to unearth these forbidden layers, the picture becomes clearer and stranger. A vast cosmic drama, only partially preserved, in which human beings are not passive recipients of divine law, but players in a story that began long before the first verse was ever written. A story that did not end with the canon, but simply went underground, waiting to be rediscovered by those willing to look beyond the edges of the approved text. The deeper one descends into the shadowed corridors of lost scripture, the clearer it becomes that early humanity was surrounded by voices, some human, some not, that shaped its memory of the world. These voices were later filtered, trimmed, and forced into a single official narrative, but their echoes still linger in manuscripts that were never meant to be seen again. If Part 1 opened the door to this hidden archive, What comes into focus next is the most forbidden memory of all: humanity's relationship with entities whose presence once seemed so obvious, so undeniable, that they were woven into every culture's earliest stories. In the banned books of the Bible, these beings are neither distant metaphors nor imagined spirits. They walk, speak, build, rebel, teach, descend, ascend, and interfere. And according to these erased texts, they did so openly, publicly, in ages when the world was still young enough to remember the footsteps of giants. The canonical Bible leaves traces of these encounters: the watchers of Genesis, the sons of God who descended to the daughters of men, the giants who roamed the earth, the mysterious beings who ate meals with Abraham, the angels who wrestled with Jacob at night, the chariots of fire that roared across the skies. But what was left in the canon is only a dim ember of what the banned books once described with feverish clarity. In those forbidden pages, the heavens are not an unreachable spiritual plane. They are a realm overlapping with ours, separated not by distance, but by access. And the beings who crossed that threshold did so with intention. When scribes of the ancient world first recorded these memories, they did not yet have the vocabulary to hide them. They wrote what they saw, what they heard, what their ancestors swore had happened. They recorded the watchers, the shining ones, the thunderous visitors, the beings whose faces were too bright to look upon, the instructors who carried knowledge of metallurgy, astronomy, herbal science, architecture, warfare, and prophecy. They recorded the rebellions among the host of heaven. They recorded the punishment of certain beings sealed beneath mountains and oceans. They recorded councils of divine beings debating the fate of humankind. And as they wrote, they preserved a larger, stranger cosmology, one that was only later dismantled. One of the most striking examples comes from a banned narrative often referred to as the Book of the Giants, a text so old its origins blur into prehistory. This book expands on a brief biblical allusion, describing a world in which hybrid beings, offspring of watchers and human women, ruled vast regions of the earth. Their size was not just physical. Their influence shaped the world's first cities, first wars, and first catastrophes. But according to this forbidden text, their reign was not simply monstrous, it was tragic. They were beings trapped between realms, not human, not divine, struggling with a consciousness too large for their mortal frames. They had dreams of impending doom, visions of cosmic judgment, nightmares of a coming flood. Some sought redemption, others sought to resist. All felt the weight of a destiny their creators never intended. It is difficult to overstate how destabilizing such a book would have been to later theological authorities. Its descriptions make the pre-flood world seem less like a mythic past and more like a technologically and spiritually advanced civilization, a realm guided by beings whose motives ranged from benevolent to predatory. The Book of the Giants portrays the earth as a battlefield of ideologies, with watchers teaching humans arts meant to uplift them, while others twisted those arts into weapons. It paints a world filled with colossal monuments, secret sanctuaries, skyborne structures, and knowledge that, to later editors, felt too much like an origin story that didn't fit their desired timeline. No wonder it was buried. No wonder its fragments were left to crumble in remote caves until modern archaeologists stumbled upon them, astonished at the audacity of what had been erased. But the Book of the Giants is only one thread in a much larger tapestry. Another forbidden text, known as the Book of Jubilees, rewrites the entire early biblical narrative with a precision that feels like someone reconstructing a historical timeline rather than a mythological one. In this lost book, events are dated down to specific years, months, and jubilees, 49-year cycles that structure divine history like a cosmic calendar. Jubilees claims that angels delivered this detailed chronology to Moses on the mountain, revealing not just laws but records of pre-human ages, celestial hierarchies, and the activities of watchers long before the flood. The book even asserts that the knowledge humans recovered after the deluge came not from random rediscovery, but from tablets preserved by beings who survived the catastrophe. If one were to accept Jubilees as literal history, the entire structure of biblical time collapses into something much older and more complex. The narrative ceases to be a simple, linear progression from creation to covenant. Instead, it becomes a cyclical interaction between realms, with angels serving as archivists, guardians, rebels, and teachers. Humanity becomes a participant in a cosmic drama that spans tens of thousands of years, not just a few millennia. And perhaps most radical of all, the book presents the law, not as something new delivered at Sinai, but as something ancient, predating the earth itself. Jubilees directly undermines the idea that Moses received something unprecedented. Instead, it portrays him as the latest link in a chain of celestial human communication far older than recorded history. Such ideas were intolerable to later editors who wanted to present the law as a singular, unique revelation. So the book was removed, minimized, relegated to apocryphal status. Yet its influence survived in the Ethiopian tradition, where it remained canonical for centuries, untouched by the political pressures that shaped Western Christianity. There, Jubilees still stands as a reminder that the early world was far more intertwined with the heavens than modern narratives allow. Another banned text, the Apocalypse of Abraham, contains scenes so extraordinary that even scholars who reject its literal truth admit its visionary power. In this lost scripture, Abraham is taken by an angelic being, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but physically, into the heavens. He sees structures of light, realms divided by frequencies of glory, cosmic beings engaged in tasks of creation, rebellion, and governance. He witnesses the fall of a celestial prince, the corruption of worlds, and the forging of covenants that stretch beyond the earth. The descriptions are not vague. They are architectural, almost technological. The heavens are portrayed as dimensioned realms, with gates, corridors, chambers, and platforms. It reads like someone attempting to explain advanced realities using the language of the ancient world. If this book had remained mainstream, the biblical heavens would look very different in modern imagination. They would not be distant clouds or intangible spirits. They would be domains with structure, motion, hierarchy, and function. The beings who inhabit them would not be wisps of light, but entities with agency, appearance, and presence. And the boundary between earth and heaven would feel permeable, not absolute. One must also consider the lost Book of Noah, a text hinted at in ancient writings, but now mostly vanished. The fragments that survive portray Noah not as a simple righteous man, but as a figure with an otherworldly birth, supernatural gifts, and access to pre-flood knowledge. Some versions even describe him as glowing at birth, causing fear among midwives, a description that later editors were understandably hesitant to preserve. In these older accounts, Noah is guided by angels who teach him how to build structures capable of surviving not just physical floods, but cosmic upheavals. The ark, in these banned books, is not merely a boat. It is a vessel of knowledge, a repository of pre-flood archives, and perhaps even a technological device designed to preserve more than just animals. Such implications were far too radical for later theology, so the book was erased, leaving only echoes in scattered manuscripts and oral traditions. And then there is the enigmatic Book of the Covenant, referred to in the Old Testament but never included in the final canon. What was in it? Why was it removed? The few clues that remain suggest it contained instructions, warnings, and visions delivered during a period of intense celestial activity. Perhaps too intense, too unfiltered, for later editors to keep intact. Some scholars believe it included laws attributed not just to Moses, but to earlier patriarchs, suggesting a line of communication between humanity and the heavens that stretched back into eras the canon tried to condense or obscure. Others believe it contained descriptions of rituals or encounters that were too controversial to preserve. Without the book itself, one can only speculate, but the deliberate nature of its disappearance is unmistakable. These banned books create a picture of a world far richer and more dangerous than the simplified version many people grew up with. They describe a universe in which multiple realms intersect, in which beings of light and shadow interact directly with humanity, in which knowledge is both a gift and a curse, and in which the early earth is a stage for conflicts that ripple through the ages. This hidden narrative implies that human history is not a closed system, but an open one, shaped continuously by forces that remain invisible today. What is perhaps most striking is that nearly every banned book agrees on one central theme. The pre-flood world was not primitive. It was a civilization marked by contact, instruction, corruption, rebellion, and catastrophic resets. The flood, in these forbidden accounts, was not just a divine punishment. It was a targeted intervention intended to reset a world spinning out of control. It was a deliberate severing of the connection between realms, a firewall to prevent further contamination. And while humanity survived, the older knowledge did not, at least not in publicly accessible form. The banned books are the scattered remnants of that forbidden archive. When later theologians assembled the canon, they did so with a specific purpose: to create a unified narrative capable of guiding communities, shaping doctrine, and providing moral clarity. But in doing so, they removed stories that were too wild, too cosmic, too unsettling. They removed hints that humanity's origins were entangled with other intelligences. They removed accounts of celestial wars that might have redefined the very nature of good and evil. They removed visions of realms whose architecture defies earthly understanding. They removed histories of beings whose presence would raise questions no church wanted to answer. And yet, despite all efforts to erase them, the banned books survived. In caves, in monasteries, in fragments carried across continents, in manuscripts smuggled during times of persecution. They survived because truth has a way of resurfacing, even when buried beneath centuries of sand and silence. If one steps back and views the surviving fragments together, not as isolated curiosities but as pieces of a single lost cosmology. An unsettling possibility emerges, that the Bible we know is the surface of a much deeper ocean. Beneath it lies a submerged world of forbidden knowledge, erased histories, cosmic encounters, and ancient covenants that once shaped the destiny of humankind. And as modern readers begin to rediscover these buried texts, the outline of that ocean appears once more, hinting at a story far older, far stranger, and far more entangled with the heavens than anyone dared to imagine. If the banned books of the Bible reveal anything, it is that the early world was not a quiet cradle of faith, but a battleground of revelations, a landscape shaped by forces that later ages tried desperately to hide. The more one studies these forbidden texts, the more the familiar biblical narrative begins to feel like a carefully edited documentary, one that presents only the episodes deemed safe for public viewing, while locking away every scene that raises uncomfortable questions. And nowhere is this selective editing more striking than in the texts that describe the transition between the primeval world of watchers and giants and the emerging post-flood world of kings, prophets, and covenants. This transitional era, barely hinted at in the canonical pages, is where the banned books shine with strange, unsettling light. To understand why so many of these texts were buried, one must first understand what they claim happened after the flood waters receded. Contrary to the simplified version told in Sunday schools, the banned books insist the flood was not an absolute wipeout. Some watchers survived. Some giants survived, though diminished. Some knowledge survived, hidden in caves, sealed in tablets, carried by refugees fleeing the destruction. And most importantly, the divide between the realms, which the flood was designed to enforce, was imperfect. Contact continued, though quieter, subtler, and far more dangerous. These accounts describe a post-flood world in which humanity was rebuilding amid the ruins of a previous age, guided by remnants of forbidden knowledge, haunted by the beings who once ruled openly, and watched by new celestial overseers determined to keep the old corruption from re-emerging. One of the most revealing banned texts describing this period is the Book of the Cave of Treasures, a work preserved in ancient Syriac traditions. Though later dismissed by scholars as legend, it presents a continuous history from Adam to Christ, with details found nowhere in the canon. What makes it so controversial is its portrayal of humanity as custodians of pre-flood artifacts. According to this lost book, Adam and his descendants preserved objects from Eden, literal objects, not symbolic ones, and hid them in a cave located within a mountain that served as a sanctuary of forbidden memory. This cave, the text claims, housed weapons forged by watchers, scrolls of celestial knowledge, and relics from the earliest patriarchs that carried secrets of creation itself. The flood did not destroy this cave. Noah's family rediscovered it. Later, prophets visited it. And in the darkest centuries of history, it became a vault where forbidden knowledge was either protected or deliberately sealed away to keep it out of human hands. If such claims were accepted, everything about biblical archaeology would change. The idea that physical remnants of Eden or pre-flood technology could survive into historical times is anathema to mainstream theology. It implies the early biblical world was not allegorical, but literal, a world where geography, objects, and entities exist in continuity rather than symbolic separation. Small wonder this text was quietly marginalized. Another banned work, the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, sometimes called Second Enoch, expands upon the aftermath of the Watcher's rebellion with extraordinary detail. Written from the perspective of a prophet taken physically into the heavens, the book describes realms populated by beings responsible for maintaining the cosmic order. It portrays the pre-flood world as a laboratory of celestial-human interaction, and the post-flood world as a probationary period in which humanity was tested to see whether it could exist without direct intervention. But the most controversial claim of this banned book is that Enoch was shown chambers filled with the souls of future generations, as if the author believed destiny existed on a kind of cosmic ledger, pre-written but not yet manifested. This deterministic vision, wildly different from later doctrines of free will, was too radical, too mystical, too esoteric for the emerging orthodoxies of the 2nd century. So the book was banned, preserved only in remote monasteries far from the centers of theological power. If the Secrets of Enoch describes the heavenly side of the post-flood transition, the Forbidden Book of Jasher describes the earthly side. Though a version of Jasher survives today, most scholars agree it is a reconstruction of fragments far older than the medieval texts that preserve it. And within those fragments lies a narrative so different from the standard biblical story that its suppression becomes almost predictable. Jasher claims that after the flood, humanity expanded rapidly, guided by knowledge carried through Noah's lineage. It describes cities established with architectural precision reminiscent of pre-flood technologies. It recounts battles not simply between tribes, but between bloodlines, some fully human, some not entirely so. It portrays Nimrod, often reduced to a villain in the canon, as a complex figure who obtains a garment belonging to Adam, granting him dominion and unnatural strength. Such a detail is bizarre by modern standards, but in the lost cosmology implied by the banned books, Adam's garment was not mere clothing. It was a relic infused with power by its proximity to the beings who crafted it. In this expanded narrative, Nimrod's rise to power was not a simple matter of political ambition. It was an engineered event, influenced by forces that sought to re-establish the pre-flood hierarchy of Watcher dominance. The building of the Tower of Babel, described in the canon as a misguided human attempt to reach heaven, becomes in the banned texts something far more dangerous, an attempt to reopen the rift between realms and re-establish communication with the beings whose rule ended in the flood. The Babel Tower becomes not a symbol of arrogance, but a technological effort, an ancient attempt to breach forbidden space. No wonder later editors sanitized the story. No wonder they removed the descriptions that made the tower sound like a structure capable of interacting with realms beyond human reach. The banned books describing this era also give a radically different picture of Abraham, often portrayed in the canon as a man stepping into history with no prior context. In the Apocalypse of Abraham, which was removed from the canon despite its popularity in early Christian and Jewish traditions, Abraham witnesses a battle between celestial forces that predates the world. He sees the fall of entities whose rebellion triggered the corruption of the early earth. He sees a vision of the heavens filled with something akin to technology, platforms, lights, and beings who operate in what looks, to modern readers, suspiciously like spacecraft. Yet the text insists these visions are not symbolic. They are literal. Abraham is shown how the universe works, how creation is structured, how the fall of celestial beings distorted the cosmic balance. Such visions were intolerable to the emerging Orthodox institutions trying to enforce a more spiritualized, less physical view of heaven. So the book was banned, preserved only in scattered Slavic manuscripts long forgotten by the Western world. What these banned books collectively reveal is that the transition from the pre-flood to the post-flood world was not a clean break, but a slow, turbulent transformation. The old beings did not disappear overnight. Their influence persisted through bloodlines, artifacts, fragments of knowledge, and whispered traditions. The post-flood world inherited not just land, but trauma, memories of catastrophe, warnings of celestial judgment, and the lingering presence of beings whose interactions with humanity had nearly destroyed the earth once already. This is why the banned books speak so vividly of the early patriarchs. Figures like Noah, Shem, and Abraham are portrayed as guardians, not just of faith, but of knowledge. They navigate a world filled with echoes of the old age, battling forces trying to restore the Watcher regime. In the Forbidden Testament of Abraham, another banned text, angels argue openly about whether humans deserve to survive. Abraham is shown how souls are weighed, how cosmic justice functions, and how celestial beings debate the fates of entire nations. These scenes feel less like moral allegories and more like someone witnessing an advanced legal system operating on a cosmic scale. Another suppressed work, The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, offers chillingly specific descriptions of pre-flood entities still influencing human behavior generations later. It describes spirits left behind after the destruction of the giants, their disembodied presence seeking to corrupt humanity from within. These spirits are not demons in the later theological sense. They are the broken remnants of hybrid beings whose bodies perished but whose consciousness lingered. The canonical Bible hints at unclean spirits, but the banned books describe their origins in detail. They are the restless shades of the giants. Their existence explains why the early biblical world feels so haunted. Dreams, possessions, sudden madness, unexplained violence. But this explanation was too disturbing to preserve, so the text was buried. Together, these banned narratives present the early biblical world not as a quiet pastoral scene, but as a cosmic aftershock zone, a landscape in recovery after a cataclysm that wiped out an advanced, corrupted civilization. The earth is repopulating, but under surveillance. Humanity is rebuilding, but cautiously. Knowledge is returning, but selectively. And through it all, a celestial conflict continues, one fought not with swords but with influence, memory, lineage, and law. The canonical Bible compresses centuries into a few neat chapters. The banned books stretch those chapters into vast epics. They describe migrations of tribes guided by angelic messengers, ancient sanctuaries where pre-flood relics were hidden, forbidden unions between lingering watchers and human women, wars fought with weapons that sound too advanced for the time, and prophetic visions that seem to describe celestial technologies rather than metaphors. They portray a world where the heavens are never silent, where beings walk among humans, where knowledge comes with a price, and where humanity is caught between forces far older than itself. And perhaps the most startling implication of these banned texts is this: the flood did not end the relationship between humans and celestial beings. It only changed the terms. The Watchers were punished, but some escaped. The giants died, but their spirits survived. The knowledge was buried, but fragments endured, and the new angels sent to watch over humanity were not always unified. Some sought to guide, others sought to suppress. Still others had motives unknown. It is in this transitional space, between the old world and the new, that the roots of Abrahamic religion take shape. And the banned books reveal that these roots are far stranger, far older, and far more entangled with celestial conflict than the modern canon suggests. They imply that humanity's earliest spiritual experiences were not simply revelations from on high, but negotiations within a cosmic battlefield. If this is true, then the biblical world is not a closed system. It is an intersection, an ancient crossroads where realms collide, where beings of immense power debate the fate of humankind, and where the survivors of a lost civilization attempt to rebuild a world amid the ruins of the one that came before. The banned books preserve this forgotten drama, and though fractured, their voices form a chorus that refuses to be silenced. They speak of warnings ignored, covenants forged in fire, knowledge preserved through catastrophe, and destinies shaped by forces humanity barely comprehended. And as we piece together their fragments, we begin to see not a small tribal history, but a story of staggering scale, a story in which Earth is only one stage in a drama playing out across realms unseen. A story later editors tried desperately to erase. The deeper one presses into the labyrinth of banned biblical writings, the stronger the feeling becomes that the ancient world was held together not simply by faith, but by memory. Memories of catastrophes, of encounters, of beings whose influence shaped the earliest societies. These memories, scattered through forbidden texts, suggest that the rise of early kingdoms, the formation of covenants, and the emergence of prophetic lineages were not organic developments, but the outcome of a cosmic struggle in which humanity was both participant and witness. If the previous parts revealed the remnants of the Watcher Age and the turbulent world after the flood, then this next stage brings us into a period of reconstruction, a time when lost knowledge resurfaced, celestial beings continued to interfere, and humanity attempted to carve out its destiny while walking among shadows. At the center of this era lie the stories connected to the earliest monarchies, stories radically different in the banned books compared to their sanitized canonical versions. The Bible presents the rise of kings as a response to social need, political development, or divine appointment. But the banned texts point to something stranger. Kingship was not merely a political invention. It was a legacy, inherited from the pre-flood world. According to forbidden manuscripts like the Book of the Rains, the earliest kings modeled themselves not on human ancestors, but on the Watchers who once ruled openly. Their symbols, regalia, architectural styles, and even their ceremonial rites were echoes of a forgotten age. The Book of the Rains, of which only fragments survive, speaks of early rulers who sought counsel from mysterious beings, some benevolent, some deceiving, all operating with agendas tied to ancient promises and ancient betrayals. One passage, considered too dangerous for preservation, allegedly described a council of early kings meeting with a radiant figure who descended like a star that stood upon the earth, this being instructed them in law, war, and governance. In later canonical tradition, these lessons are attributed to prophets inspired by God. But in the banned books, the picture grows complicated. Some kings received guidance from angels loyal to the Most High. Others were influenced by remnants of the fallen Watchers, who still whispered from the edges of the world, seeking to restore the old order. The result was a fractured landscape of kingdoms, some righteous, some corrupt, some caught between realms. The complexity of this cosmic rivalry becomes even clearer in the banned Testament of Amram, a text preserved in only a handful of fragments discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. In it, the father of Moses describes a terrifying vision. Two beings, each colossal and luminous, battling for influence over him before his birth. One being is bright, with eyes like burning fire and a face too brilliant to behold. The other is dark, massive, crowned with smoke and surrounded by chaos. Both beings claim power over the fate of the child. Both claim to speak truth. And Amram is left in anguish, unsure which voice represents the Most High. This depiction of cosmic dualism was far too radical for later monotheistic frameworks. It implied that spiritual influence was contested, that multiple celestial powers sought dominion over human destiny. No wonder the book was hidden away, quietly buried under centuries of sand. The banned books also broaden the world around Moses himself, presenting him not simply as a prophet, but as a bridge, a figure whose life marks the moment when the cosmic battle spilled into human society in full force. The canonical Exodus describes the plagues as divine judgments, but the banned texts paint them as something else entirely, the collision of celestial forces. In the Apocalypse of Moses, a forbidden manuscript that circulated briefly before being condemned, Moses witnesses beings of fire and storm descending into Egypt, not metaphorically, but physically, to confront powerful entities worshipped as gods. These Egyptian gods, in the banned narrative, are not imagined idols but real celestial beings, some fallen, some rebellious, some left over from the Watcher age, who had set themselves up as rulers over nations. Their thrones were built on deception, and their power was formidable. The plagues, in this forbidden version, are not merely divine acts, but targeted strikes, dismantling the influence of these beings and reclaiming the land from their grasp. What is most startling about this banned account is the way it portrays Moses interacting with these forces. He is not simply a messenger. He is a negotiator, a mediator, a figure who understands the hidden rules governing the realms. The staff he carries is not just a symbol of authority, but a relic tied to ancient covenants made long before his birth. In one passage of the forbidden text, Moses touches the staff to the ground and sees, for a moment, visions of the pre-flood world, cities of giants, towering structures built under the direction of Watchers, and catastrophic battles waged in the skies. This staff, the book claims, was originally forged by celestial hands, passed from Adam to Enoch, hidden during the flood, and recovered by the lineage that brought it to Moses. Such claims were unacceptable to later editors. They blurred the line between human and heavenly authority, implying that Moses was part of a much older lineage, stretching back to the earliest days of creation. The banned book of Eldad and Modad, referenced in ancient Jewish writings but suppressed for centuries, tells of two prophets who shared visions of the same cosmic struggle. Their prophecies were so disturbing, describing wars among divine beings, hybrid offspring hidden in remote places, and ancient relics buried beneath deserts. that their writings were suppressed even during the era of the prophets. According to fragments preserved in commentary, their book described the pre-flood watchers traveling across the earth in homes that shone like the sun, carrying with them knowledge of metallurgy, agriculture, law, and warfare. These homes, described in language almost technological, were said to rise above mountains, descend into the deep, and transport beings between realms. Eldad and Modad warned that remnants of this technology still existed, hidden away by ancient kings, and that future generations would rediscover them, ushering in a time of upheaval. This prediction alone would have marked the book as heretical, but its most dangerous claim was that certain nations had inherited fragments of Watcher knowledge and would use it to challenge divine authority. It was easier to ban the text than to wrestle with its implications. The banned Book of Og, a shocking document discovered in fragments in the 20th century, adds yet another layer of complexity. Og, the last of the Rephaim, is portrayed not as a monstrous giant, but as a tragic survivor of an ancient lineage. The banned book claims he lived for centuries, witnessing the flood from a vantage point that defies canonical timelines. It describes him hiding in caverns built by watchers, surviving on knowledge given to him before the deluge, and emerging into a changed world. His encounters with humanity after the flood reveal a being torn between loyalty to his old lineage and fear of judgment. The canonical Bible mentions him briefly, almost dismissively, but the banned text presents him as a living relic, a final reminder of an age wiped from the earth. Such a sympathetic portrayal of a giant, a being considered an enemy of Israel, was unacceptable to later editors. The book was destroyed almost everywhere, except for a few fragments that survived long enough to shock modern scholars. Another forbidden manuscript, the Book of the Angel Raziel, expands on the idea that Adam and his descendants received knowledge directly from celestial beings. In this banned text, Raziel, the secret keeper of heaven, appears to Adam after his expulsion from Eden and gives him a book containing the mysteries of creation. This book, according to the forbidden narrative, includes knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, healing, and even the workings of the heavens themselves. It is said to contain diagrams of the cosmos, maps of hidden realms, and instructions for interacting with celestial beings. But when the book falls into the hands of corrupt individuals in later generations, its knowledge is misused. The Watchers exploit its information to teach forbidden arts, leading to the corruption that brought about the flood. After the deluge, the book is recovered by Noah, passed down through generations, and eventually hidden away by prophets who fear its misuse. The idea that a physical object, handed down from Adam, contained such potent knowledge posed an obvious threat to later religious authorities. The book was banned, its existence denied, its fragments burned. The banned texts describing the period of the judges and early kings also offer startling revelations. In the Chronicles of the seer Samuel, a forbidden work referenced in ancient traditions but destroyed in later centuries, Samuel describes battles not merely between nations, but between realms. He speaks of visions in which celestial beings observe human conflicts, intervening at times, withdrawing at others. He describes a giant warrior, a remnant of the old world, standing against Israel with armor that gleams like molten metal, suggesting a technology lost to humanity. The canonical versions reduce these descriptions to poetic metaphor, but the banned text insists they were literal, remnants of a technological and spiritual age long forgotten. What becomes clear when studying these forbidden manuscripts is that early Israelite history, as portrayed in the banned books, takes place on a landscape still scarred by the Watcher era. Hidden structures lie beneath mountains. Caverns contain relics of unknown purpose. Certain tribes inherit fragments of ancient knowledge, both dangerous and powerful. Prophets wage battles not only in the material world, but in the unseen one. And celestial forces, both loyal and rebellious, continue to influence the course of nations. The banned texts also insist that many prophets interacted with celestial beings in ways far more physical and direct than later editors were willing to acknowledge. The Ascension of Isaiah, including sections removed from the canon, describes the prophet traveling through 7 heavens, witnessing beings of immense power, each with roles tied to maintaining cosmic order. He sees watchers bound in chains, their faces hidden by shadows. He sees realms where souls await judgment, where future events are recorded, where celestial beings debate the fate of nations. Isaiah's visions are not symbolic. They are depicted as journeys, guided by angels who move through realms with ease, unaffected by barriers of time and space. This depiction was too controversial for later theology, so the most explicit sections were removed, and the book was relegated to apocryphal obscurity. Even more unsettling are the banned descriptions of the Ark of the Covenant found in forbidden writings like the Revelation of Ezra. In these texts, the Ark is portrayed not just as a ceremonial object, but as a device of immense power, capable of emitting light so intense that it blinds those who approach without proper preparation. The banned texts describe the Ark as a channel of communication with celestial beings, a kind of ancient interface through which prophets received visions, messages, and warnings. In one banned passage, Ezra describes the Ark levitating above the ground during a ritual, its sides glowing, its interior filled with a light that moved like living fire. Later editors deemed such descriptions too fantastical, too suggestive of technology rather than spirituality. They purged the accounts and preserved only the theological symbolism. Taken together, these banned writings paint a portrait of the early biblical world as a borderland, a place where the remnants of an ancient cosmic age collided with the emerging structures of human civilization. It was a time when humanity attempted to rebuild order from chaos, guided by prophets who carried glimpses of a reality too vast for their contemporaries to comprehend. It was a time when celestial beings, both loyal and rebellious, continued to influence events on earth. It was a time when knowledge passed down from the pre-flood world still lingered, dangerous, powerful, and forbidden. The official canon presents the early biblical era as a straightforward progression: judges, kings, prophets, covenants. The banned books reveal something far stranger: a cosmic drama unfolding behind the scenes, with humanity caught in the crossfire. They hint that early civilization was shaped not just by divine guidance, but by ancient forces struggling to assert control over the new world. And they preserve fragments of a history that later editors tried desperately to erase. A history in which angels walked openly, giants survived the flood, kings sought relics from the Watcher Age, and prophets witnessed realms unknown to modern theology. This hidden narrative, once removed, left a sanitized version of history. But the banned books, though shattered and scattered, still whisper truths from the shadows. Truths that force us to question everything we think we know about the ancient world, and everything we assume about the forces that shaped it. As we move deeper into the strata of banned biblical writings, the landscape changes again. The earliest layers told of watchers and giants, of a world shattered and rebuilt under the shadow of celestial intervention. The next layers revealed a turbulent post-flood transition, where humanity inherited both trauma and fragments of forbidden knowledge. But the banned books describing the era of the prophets, especially the major prophets, expose something far more unnerving. That prophecy itself was not merely the act of hearing God's voice, but the ability to access realms, beings, and histories that later editors tried desperately to hide. The prophets portrayed in the official canon are powerful figures, but still safe. In the banned texts, they become something else entirely. Travelers between worlds, witnesses to cosmic machinery, participants in a war that stretched far beyond the human sphere. To understand why these writings were banned, one must confront the figure who appears again and again in the forbidden manuscripts. A being known in some texts as the Prince of the Presence, a luminous entity whose role was to guide, warn, and sometimes confront the prophets in ways that defy later theological categories. In the canonical Bible, this being is called an angel, but in the banned books, his description borders on the terrifying. He is immense, radiant, his voice like thunder, his form shifting between human and star-like. In some forbidden writings, he appears as a guardian, in others as a judge, in still others as a warrior engaged in battles unseen by human eyes. His presence alone could destabilize the simplified heaven-earth division created by later editors. The ascension of Isaiah, especially the sections removed from the final canon, describes an encounter that is far more than a vision. Isaiah is physically taken, pulled through realms layered like veils, each more overwhelming than the last. In the banned version, Isaiah describes passing through structures of light, spheres inhabited by beings that burn like stars, realms where ancient records flicker like living scrolls. He is shown watchers bound in chains, their once radiant forms scarred by ages of imprisonment. He sees the remnants of celestial battles, the scars left on the fabric of creation itself. None of this appears in the sanitized canonical text. Later editors removed the portions that resembled cosmic navigation, fearing they would blur the line between the prophetic and the mythological. But in the banned manuscripts, the idea is clear. The prophets were not simply hearing messages. They were witnessing the architecture of the universe. No figure embodies this more dramatically than Ezekiel. The canonical description of his visions, the wheels within wheels, the beings of fire, the luminous chariot, is already extraordinary. But the banned books that expand on Ezekiel's writings reveal how much was removed. In the forbidden book of the chariot, Ezekiel is not just a passive observer. He is instructed in the operation of the celestial vehicle. He is shown how the wheels interlock, how the living beings control the platform, how energy flows from the throne above. He describes structures like engines, radiating heat, surrounded by what sound uncannily like protective shields. These descriptions were deemed too mechanical, too technological, too reminiscent of something other than spiritual vision. So the book was purged, surviving only in fragments quoted by mystics centuries later. The banned writings also reveal that Ezekiel's encounters were not isolated. According to forbidden manuscripts discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, other prophets witnessed the same chariot of the heavens, each describing details that later editors attempted to harmonize into metaphor. The Book of the Luminaries, a suppressed work associated with Enochic tradition, describes the chariot as a device capable of moving between realms, powered by beings of intense radiance, guided by principles that resemble physics more than poetry. It recounts how certain prophets were chosen to be shown these mysteries because the future of their people depended on understanding the movements of the heavens, not as astrology, but as geopolitics of celestial realms. Jeremiah, too, appears in the banned corpus in a very different light. The Forbidden Book of Baruch, not the version preserved in Catholic tradition, but an earlier, more radical one, describes Jeremiah fleeing Jerusalem not merely to escape the Babylonians, but because he had been warned by a celestial being of a coming breach between realms. In this banned text, Jeremiah sees visions of beings descending into the city, not to save it, but to withdraw their presence, leaving Jerusalem exposed to destruction. These beings, the text claims, had once walked openly among the people, guiding kings and prophets, but now retreated because humanity had chosen leaders influenced by darker forces. Such a portrayal of divine absence was too theologically dangerous. It implied that celestial beings moved strategically, responding not only to human obedience, but to cosmic conditions invisible to human eyes. Thus, the book was condemned and largely erased. One of the most shocking banned accounts involves the prophet Elijah. The canonical narrative describes Elijah being taken to heaven in a whirlwind, accompanied by a fiery chariot. But the forbidden book of the journey of Elijah claims that Elijah did not simply ascend into heaven. He was taken to a specific realm, one inhabited by beings who had survived the great cosmic rebellions. These beings, according to the banned manuscript, were neither fully loyal nor fully fallen. They were watchers who had chosen neutrality, withdrawing from both factions. Elijah was taken to negotiate with them, to warn them that a new age was coming, one in which neutrality would no longer be possible. This depiction of Elijah as an ambassador in celestial politics was too radical for later editors. It blurred the boundary between prophet and cosmic envoy. The manuscript was suppressed, preserved only in esoteric circles. Another layer of banned literature concerns the Testament of Solomon, not the later medieval version filled with obvious folklore, but a far older version referenced in ancient sources. According to this forbidden text, Solomon gained wisdom not merely through prayer, but through contact with beings who existed outside the human realm. The canonical Bible hints at this by describing Solomon conversing with animals, understanding the language of trees, and possessing knowledge of all creation. But the banned text goes further. It describes Solomon commanding beings left behind from the Watcher Age, some benign, others dangerous. These beings, often conflated with demons in later tradition, were portrayed in the banned text as remnants of ancient eras, some seeking redemption, others seeking escape. Solomon, according to this forbidden manuscript, created a systematic taxonomy of these entities, cataloging their abilities, histories, weaknesses, and alliances. This knowledge, the banned book claims, was stored in a hidden archive that survived the destruction of Jerusalem. The idea that Solomon's wisdom came from interacting with ancient beings rather than purely divine inspiration, threatened theological foundations and was therefore removed. The banned materials concerning Daniel are equally astonishing. The canonical book describes Daniel's visions with metaphorical language, beasts, horns, thrones, but the forbidden revelations of Daniel, referenced in early Christian writings, describe in vivid detail the moment Daniel communicates directly with celestial beings who show him maps of future empires, not in symbolic form, but in literal projections. Daniel sees luminous lines stretching across continents, depicting the rise and fall of nations. He witnesses battles between entities described as princes, not earthly rulers, but celestial powers assigned to different regions of the world. The banned text implies that geopolitical events were shadows of wars occurring in higher realms. This idea, though hinted at in the canonical Book of Daniel through brief references to the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece, was too politically volatile for later ages. It suggested that nations were not merely human constructs, but the earthly manifestations of celestial disputes. The forbidden text was suppressed to prevent such interpretations. Even more forbidden were the texts describing Jonah, not as a reluctant prophet swallowed by a fish, but as a man who attempted to flee not only from a divine calling, but from a cosmic mandate. The banned chronicles of Jonah describe him having dreams of beings descending over Nineveh, preparing to enact judgment unless he intervened. Jonah flees because he fears these beings, not because he doubts his mission. According to the forbidden text, the great fish was not a sea creature at all, but a vessel of the deep, a dwelling place of beings tasked with transporting prophets between regions. Jonah is taken into this vessel, shown visions of destruction, and returned to land with the understanding that he must act to prevent calamity. Such an interpretation turned the story into something far stranger than the moral tale later generations preferred, and so it was removed. The banned writings around Amos and Hosea expand on another disturbing theme: the existence of hidden sanctuaries where forbidden knowledge was stored, protected by prophets who understood the dangers of its misuse. These sanctuaries, according to the forbidden manuscripts, contained relics from the Watcher Age, preserved not for reactivation, but for future warning. Some texts describe stone tablets etched with symbols unknown to modern linguists. Others describe metallic objects that glowed when touched by certain individuals. Still others mention scrolls written in the script of the heavens, a form of writing intelligible only to those chosen by celestial beings. The prophets, according to these banned books, guarded these sanctuaries fiercely, knowing that kings, and worse, foreign powers, would seek to exploit the objects stored within. The prophetic era, as depicted in these hidden texts, was not a quiet time of sermons and visions. It was a battlefield of information. Prophets clashed with kings not merely over morality, but over knowledge. Who possessed it, who controlled it, who was allowed to understand it. In the banned Book of the Watchtower, a controversial manuscript referenced in early rabbinic writings, the prophets are described as those who see the breach, individuals capable of perceiving openings between realms, moments when the barrier between worlds grew thin. During these breaches, visions flowed, messages crossed, and energies moved. The prophets recorded these breaches meticulously, understanding that they indicated changes in the cosmic balance. But the idea that prophets were cosmic observers rather than merely moral teachers threatened later theological structures. The book was suppressed. One recurring theme across all banned prophetic texts is the idea of the heavenly tablets, records said to exist in celestial realms, documenting events not yet manifested on earth. The canonical Bible hints at these tablets in books like Daniel and Revelation, but the banned texts describe them in far greater detail. According to these manuscripts, the heavenly tablets contain the true history of the world, past, present, and future. Prophets were sometimes granted glimpses of these tablets, not to see the future in deterministic detail, but to understand the patterns governing history. This idea threatened the theological notion of free will. It suggested that history followed cosmic rhythms shaped by forces beyond human understanding. To preserve the illusion of human autonomy, later editors removed most references to the tablets, leaving only cryptic hints. Across this entire banned corpus, one thing becomes clear. The prophets were not insulated from the cosmic drama of Watcher rebellion, post-flood resurgence, celestial politics, and ancient technologies. They were at the center of it. Their visions were not hallucinations. They were brief openings into a reality far grander than the official canon dared to acknowledge. The banned books present the prophets as individuals capable of navigating these realities, sometimes terrified, sometimes willing, sometimes overwhelmed by what they saw. They encountered beings whose presence could level cities, disrupt empires, and alter the course of history. They battled influences both earthly and otherworldly. They safeguarded knowledge that could destroy entire civilizations if released prematurely. And ultimately, they preserved a story that later editors tried desperately to erase, a story of humanity entangled in cosmic conflict, guided by celestial allies, hunted by ancient enemies, and repeatedly tested to determine whether it could survive contact with truths far older and far stranger than the world we think we know. As the chorus of banned prophetic writings echoes through the lost corridors of ancient scripture, a new pattern emerges, one that pulls the reader even deeper into the understructure of the biblical world. The forbidden books describing the era between the late prophets and the rise of the Second Temple do not simply add details. They alter the architecture of everything we assume about this period. The canonical narrative presents these centuries as a time of exile, return, and rebuilding. An era of political turmoil, but spiritually straightforward. Yet in the banned texts, this era becomes something far stranger. A time of hidden battles, suppressed revelations, cosmic fractures, and encounters that threatened to reveal too much about the nature of heaven, earth, and the beings that walked between them. These banned manuscripts insist the exile was not just a political disaster. It was a cosmic event. Something shifted, something broke, and the prophets of the era felt it in visions so intense that later theologians refused to preserve them. One of the most disturbing banned texts associated with the exile is the Revelation of Habakkuk, a manuscript so fragmented and so radical that only a few lines were quoted in ancient commentaries before the full text disappeared. In the banned version, Habakkuk describes a moment when the heavens trembled and the boundary was shaken, language that scholars once dismissed as metaphor until similar phrases appeared in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The forbidden text claims that a breach occurred between realms, a disruption that allowed beings who had been sealed away since the flood to move closer to the world of humans. These beings, described in shapes of storm and shadow, whispered to kings and manipulated battles, attempting to tilt the course of history. Habakkuk's warnings were not just social or moral, they were cosmic. This interpretation was too apocalyptic, too destabilizing. The text was suppressed. The banned writings concerning Ezekiel after the temple's destruction go even further. The canonical book ends with a detailed vision of a future temple, but the forbidden visions of the Watchers, a manuscript once attributed to Ezekiel, reveals why his visions became so architectural. According to the banned text, Ezekiel was shown not only a blueprint for the earthly temple, but a map of the heavenly one, a structure not fixed but dynamic, its chambers shifting according to cosmic conditions. The banned manuscript describes corridors of living light, sanctuaries where beings radiating fire perform tasks of creation and restoration, and a throne beneath which flowed rivers of luminous substance that the text calls the water of days. Ezekiel is shown how the earthly temple mirrored only a fraction of the heavenly structure. He understands that rebuilding the earthly sanctuary was not a mere national project. It was an act meant to realign the realms, to restore stability after the breach. Such depictions were too mystical, too physical, too technological for later editors. The manuscript was hidden. Then, there are the banned writings associated with Zechariah. The canonical version contains surreal visions, flying scrolls, women in baskets, horsemen patrolling the earth. But the banned book of the 7 luminous ones makes these visions seem almost tame. In the forbidden text, Zechariah is taken to a realm described as the place between winds, a domain that exists between earthly and celestial planes. There he witnesses 7 towering beings made of light, their faces obscured by radiance. They reveal ancient battles that shaped the nations, showing him how celestial powers, called princes of the wards, were assigned authority over different regions of the world. Some princes remained loyal to the Most High, others became ambitious, manipulating kings to expand territories aligned with their agenda. Zechariah sees these princes contending over Jerusalem itself, their influence manifesting in the political chaos that the canonical text describes without cosmic context. This portrayal was profoundly dangerous to later theological systems. It implied that nations were not just human constructs, but manifestations of moral, spiritual, and cosmic conflicts. The manuscript was banned and largely erased. The return from exile also takes on a radically different tone in the banned books. In the canonical version, Ezra and Nehemiah are faithful leaders restoring the law and rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. But in the forbidden account of the returned ones, Ezra is described as receiving visions so overwhelming that he collapses, unable to speak for days. The banned text claims he is shown the Great Vault, a realm where memories of all ages are stored, like shimmering tablets suspended in darkness. Ezra sees the rise and fall of civilizations older than the flood, wars among watchers, the corruption of nations by beings sealed beneath mountains, and the catastrophe that fractured the realms. He begs for the strength to survive the revelation. The Most High commands an angel to give Ezra a sip of the water of understanding, after which Ezra wakes, trembling, but able to write. According to this forbidden manuscript, the books attributed to Ezra in the canon were only a fraction of what he recorded. The rest, visions that challenged the very structure of theology, were hidden by the elders of the community out of fear that the people would lose their minds. Later editors, inheriting only fragments, discarded the rest. But perhaps the most unsettling banned text from this era concerns the prophet Daniel. Not the Daniel of lions and dreams, but the Daniel who lived into old age, seeing realms unfold before his eyes. The forbidden book of the Eastern Gate, attributed to Daniel, describes a moment when he is taken by an angelic being to a gate of fire that stands between worlds. Through this gate, Daniel sees beings moving in patterns like constellations shifting in real time. He sees the princes of the realms, radiant and terrible, debating the fate of future empires. One being warns that humanity is approaching an era when celestial boundaries will weaken again, just as they did before the flood. Daniel asks why the Most High allows this. The answer, according to the banned text, is because humanity must learn to rule itself without the Watchers or their rebellious offspring. The earth must be tested to see whether it can uphold justice without celestial intervention. This idea, that celestial restraint is deliberate, temporary, and part of a larger cosmic plan, was too complex for later religious frameworks. The book was destroyed, surviving only in obscure quotations. The banned texts concerning the rebuilding of the Second Temple add yet another layer to this hidden history. The canonical account frames the project in political and priestly terms, but the forbidden scroll of the foundation stone describes something startling. When the builders laid the first stone, the ground vibrated, and a deep, ancient sound echoed beneath the earth. According to the banned manuscript, this was the awakening of something hidden since the flood. A watcher vault, a chamber beneath the city where beings or relics from the pre-flood world had been sealed. Zechariah, in the banned account, warns the builders that disturbing the vault could unleash forces beyond their control. He commands them to shift the foundation slightly to avoid opening the vault. They obey, and the vibrations cease. Such a story was too mythological, too mystical, too destabilizing. The manuscript was banned. A similar forbidden text, the Vision of Haggai, describes a moment when Haggai sees a massive shadow moving beneath the ruins of the first temple. The shadow has shape, form, and intent. It reaches upward, as if trying to re-enter the world. Haggai cries out in terror, believing the fallen watchers are stirring. An angel appears, assuring him that the shadow is not a watcher, but the echo of their past, the imprint of their presence left on the world. The angel warns that such echoes will grow stronger as the end of the age approaches. This apocalyptic implication was unacceptable, and so the text vanished. As centuries pass in the banned books, the world becomes stranger still. The forbidden manuscripts describing the era between the Testaments reveal a period often called the Silent Years. Or, the canonical Bible says little about these centuries, but the banned books insist they were anything but silent. One of the most cryptic of these texts, the Book of the Veil, describes how a young priest, wandering through the ruins of a former sanctuary, stumbles upon a hidden chamber containing stone tablets glowing faintly. When he touches one, he receives a vision of a heavenly council debating the fate of the world. The Most High declares that the realms are shifting again, and that a messenger will soon descend to prepare the world for a new revelation. The council erupts in debate. Some celestial beings rejoice. Others fear that the new era will unleash forces long restrained. This vision drives the young priest into madness. The elders destroy the tablets and ban any mention of the chamber. The manuscript recording this incident was later suppressed and survives only in fragments quoted by esoteric sects. The banned Book of the Shadows of Light, attributed to an unknown visionary during this same period, describes encounters with beings who appear to humanity as flashes of lightning, whirlwinds, and luminous figures. These beings speak of a coming unveiling, an era in which humanity will be confronted with truths too great for it to bear. They warn that the Watcher's influence is not entirely gone, that certain bloodlines still carry fragments of celestial memory, that certain nations hold relics from the ancient world, and that certain individuals, born with strange gifts, are capable of perceiving what others cannot. These claims were seen as too esoteric, too divisive, too apocalyptic. The text was banned. Probably the most explosive banned text from this period is the Scroll of the Four Winds. According to this manuscript, 4 celestial beings, each representing one of the winds of the earth, descend to deliver warnings to humanity. They reveal that the realms are beginning to overlap again, subtly, slowly, but unmistakably. The breaches that had been sealed since the flood are weakening. Prophetic dreams increase. Strange lights appear in the skies. Individuals report hearing voices calling from mountains, deserts, and seas. The celestial beings warn that forces long sealed away will soon attempt to re-enter the world. They instruct the visionary to write everything down and hide it. The manuscript was discovered centuries later, declared heretical, and burned. Only a few lines survive in fringe commentaries. The banned books collectively present the so-called silent years as a turbulent, supernatural period in which celestial and fallen entities maneuvered behind the scenes, preparing for a coming shift. Humanity, unaware of the cosmic movements unfolding around it, believed itself to be living in a lull. But the banned texts insist that this was a false calm, like the moment before a storm. And it is here that the forbidden manuscripts begin to foreshadow the arrival of a figure whose presence will change everything. One who is both human and more than human, both within the world and beyond it. One whose life will force celestial and earthly realms to collide again. The banned books never mention him directly, but their prophecies, cryptic, cosmic, dangerous, point toward a moment when the realms will align, when beings from the heights and depths will stir, and when humanity will be confronted with a truth that had been buried since the days of watchers and giants. What these banned writings reveal is that the world of the Bible was never silent, never isolated, never purely human. It was a battleground of realms, a crossroads of beings, a fragile world suspended between forces beyond comprehension. And the centuries leading to the next great revelation were not empty. They were the quiet tightening of a cosmic knot, a silence waiting to break. By the time the banned biblical writings approach the era commonly associated with the dawn of the New Testament, they undergo yet another transformation, one that is both subtle and seismic. The earlier forbidden texts described a world shaped by watchers, giants, cosmic breaches, prophetic ascents, and heavenly machinery. But the banned manuscripts from this transitional era focus on something far more mysterious: the anticipation of a figure whose appearance would rupture the boundary between realms in a way not seen since the ancient cataclysms. These texts, stripped from the canon long before it was finalized, portray the world as a stage bracing for impact, as celestial and terrestrial forces converge around a single impending event. Though they never name him directly, their prophecies, warnings, and mythologies point unmistakably toward the arrival of a being whose existence would redefine the cosmic order. What becomes immediately clear is that the banned writings treat this period not as a calm interlude, but as the climax of a long war, an ancient conflict stretching back to the Watcher Rebellion, the pre-flood corruption, and the cosmic fractures described earlier. According to these forbidden texts, the centuries leading to the turn of the age were filled with ominous signs. Strange lights appeared over mountains. Priests reported hearing voices in sanctuaries when no one was present. Shepherds saw figures walking in the sky above desert regions. Astrologers claimed the heavens were speaking in ways not witnessed in 1,000 years. And prophets, though fewer in number, continued to have visions so overwhelming that they collapsed, trembling, unable to describe what they had seen. Many of these visions pointed to a single revelation: that the realms were aligning again. One of the most controversial banned manuscripts describing this era is the Book of the Coming Light, preserved only in scattered quotations by early mystics. The forbidden text opens with a chilling declaration: "When the time is full, when the veil thins, when the heavens circle in their ancient dance, a light not of this world shall enter the world." The language does not describe a moral teacher or a political figure. It describes an incursion of cosmic magnitude. The book claims that celestial beings have watched humanity struggle for ages, from the Watcher corruption to the flood to the exile, waiting for a moment when a chosen vessel could bridge the realms. The manuscript warns that his arrival will trigger reactions from all sides: loyalty, rebellion, fear, awe, and violence from both mortal and immortal beings. Such implications threatened theological stability, so the book was banned. Yet another forbidden text from this period, the Revelation of the Magi, exists in a corrupt form today, but was originally far stranger. The banned version described beings of pure light descending in forms that men could bear, instructing watchers stationed in the remote east to prepare for the arrival of a cosmic king. These beings were not mere angels in the later theological sense. They were guardians of a celestial archive, ancient entities who claimed to have witnessed the creation of multiple worlds. In the banned text, they reveal that the coming figure will not simply teach wisdom. He will tear open the old veil and reveal hidden truths sealed since before the flood. The banned manuscript even claims that these beings traveled across realms to deliver a star-like device, something that would guide the Watcher's descendants to witness the moment of arrival. Such descriptions blurred the line between spirituality and celestial technology. The book was suppressed, surviving in fragments. Equally astonishing is the Forbidden Book of the Hidden Elder, a manuscript once cherished by a sect known only through archaeological traces. According to this banned book, an elderly prophet living in the wilderness encountered a being who descended in a sphere of fire. The being warned him that the world stood on the edge of a cosmic threshold. The prophet asked whether this meant another flood or another rebellion. The being replied, "Neither. This time it is the Maker himself who draws near." In the forbidden text, the prophet is shown a vision of a bridge of light connecting heaven and earth, and at its center a figure shining like the sun, but clothed in flesh. The prophet is commanded to guard this revelation, for those who rule the temples and palaces will seek to destroy its truth. The manuscript was deemed too theologically threatening, too literal, too cosmic, too embodied. It was erased almost completely. Another layer of banned writings deals with an order of mystics active in the last generations before the New Age dawned. These mystics, described in texts like the forbidden scrolls of the Silent Watchers, believed their task was to monitor the thinning of the veil separating realms. They lived in deserts, caves, and remote mountain communities, watching the stars, recording strange phenomena, interpreting dreams, and performing rituals meant to stabilize the cosmos. According to the banned scrolls, these mystics claimed that celestial beings once again walked the earth, not openly as before the flood, but in hidden forms. They spoke of messengers in the guise of beggars, wanderers whose footsteps made no sound, and voices that came from burning stones in the wilderness. Their visions centered on a prophecy, that the veil was weakening because a convergence was approaching, a moment when the heavens would enter history in an unprecedented way. Later editors considered these writings too mystical and too suggestive of an environment saturated with supernatural presence. The scrolls were buried, their communities destroyed. One of the most intriguing forbidden manuscripts from this transitional era is the Chronicle of the Crossroads, a text allegedly composed by scribes influenced by both prophetic and apocalyptic traditions. According to the banned book, the world had reached a point of cosmic tension. Earthquakes, comets, political upheavals, and spiritual unrest were not merely earthly events. They were symptoms of a cosmic alignment. The manuscript describes a crossroad of the ages, a moment when celestial gates that had remained closed since the days of Noah would open briefly, allowing a messenger of unprecedented nature to pass through. The chronicle claims that watchers imprisoned in the deep sensed this shift and cried out, while loyal celestial beings prepared for conflict. The idea that the world was on the verge of a dimensional intersection threatened later systems that sought to downplay cosmic speculation. The manuscript was purged. A banned text known as the Testament of Simeon the Just offers another perspective. In this forbidden book, a dying priest sees visions of a figure surrounded by beings of fire and wind. The figure descends into a dark realm, shattering chains and leading captives upward into the light. The banned text emphasizes the figure's dual nature, human enough to enter the realm of death, yet luminous enough to shatter its foundations. Later editors removed these accounts because they implied a theology too dramatic, too physical, too cosmic for the developing doctrines of the institutional traditions. One of the most controversial banned writings from this period is the Book of the Birth of the Holy One, which survives today only in references from fringe mystical groups. The forbidden manuscript claims that celestial beings appeared to multiple individuals across the ancient world, delivering cryptic prophecies about a coming convergence. Some of these visions occurred among shepherds in the desert, others among astrologer priests in distant lands, and still others among women who dreamed of stars descending into their wombs. The banned text portrays these visions not as mere dreams, but as encounters with beings who stood between worlds, capable of manipulating matter, light, and spirit. They describe a moment when a being of the highest realm would incarnate in the world in order to heal the ancient breach left by the Watcher rebellion. The text's explicitness made it too dangerous for preservation. Equally astonishing is the Forbidden Scroll of the Sealed Garden, a manuscript describing a group of scribes tasked with guarding a secret prophecy handed down through generations since the days of Daniel. According to the banned scroll, this prophecy warned that the Watcher's ancient crimes had created a wound in creation, one that could only be healed by the intervention of a being born of woman yet formed of light. The scribes believed this figure would confront the very forces that once corrupted the early world: the rebellious Watchers, the spirits of the giants, the princes of the nations, and the energies released by past cosmic breaches. The scribes were instructed to hide the prophecy in a sealed chamber, for, when the time comes, the truth will reveal itself. The manuscript was hidden, rediscovered, declared heretical, and destroyed. Another forbidden text from this era, the Book of the Living Flame, speaks in apocalyptic tones. It describes a cosmic gathering of celestial beings preparing for a coming upheaval. The manuscript refers to the flame that walks, a mysterious figure who will descend into the world not to bring destruction, but to pierce the ancient darkness. The text reads almost like a record of celestial strategy. Beings of extraordinary power debate how the figure will enter the world, which lineage he will take, how he will remain hidden from the rebellious forces seeking to extinguish him. The manuscript claims that certain nations will be stirred by dark influences to resist his arrival, while others will be guided by luminous beings to recognize him. Such cosmic framing was unacceptable to later editors, who sought to confine the narrative to purely historical categories. The book was banned. Perhaps the most haunting of the banned manuscripts is the Scroll of the 12 Signs, a text that describes 12 celestial events occurring over the course of a single generation. Comets, eclipses, earthquakes, storms of unusual intensity. These were interpreted not as natural occurrences, but as signals marking the approach of a cosmic turning point. The scrolls claim that certain individuals, by birthright or divine choice, could sense these signs more intensely. They experienced visions, dreams, and physical sensations when celestial forces moved. The banned text describes these individuals as those who stand on the threshold, destined to witness the convergence firsthand. Their existence threatened theological structures built on the premise that divine revelation had ceased. The scroll was destroyed. But perhaps the most important banned manuscript from this era is the Book of the Shining Man, a text so radical that only 2 short quotations survive in ancient commentaries. According to the forbidden account, a figure was seen in the wilderness by multiple witnesses across different regions. He appeared as a man, yet glowing faintly, as if reflecting a light from within. Some described him as wearing ordinary clothing. Others claimed that his appearance shifted, as though he moved between densities or planes. The banned text portrays him as a harbinger, a being whose presence indicated that the long-awaited convergence was near. The text claims he spoke to some witnesses in riddles, to others in visions, and to still others in direct, startling clarity. He warned them that a cosmic event was approaching, one that would bring both salvation and conflict. The manuscript was declared heretical and systematically erased. Through these banned writings, a picture emerges of a world on the brink, not of political revolution, though that too brewed in the background, but of a cosmic transformation. The watchers stirred. The princes of the nations maneuvered. The spirits of the giants recoiled. The loyal celestial beings prepared for an event of unprecedented magnitude. And humanity, unaware of the cosmic convergence unfolding around it, moved through its days as though nothing unusual were happening. What the banned books reveal is that the world was not silent between the testaments. It was trembling, waiting, aligning, like the pause in the atmosphere before a storm breaks, like the hush before the curtain rises, like creation itself holding its breath. For something was coming, something ancient, something foretold, something that would tear open the boundary between realms and force the hidden world into the light. A moment unlike any since the days when watchers descended from the sky. By the time the banned biblical manuscripts reach the era that later tradition would call the dawn of the New Testament, the tone of these forbidden writings shifts from anticipation to eruption. The muted murmurs of earlier centuries, the cryptic visions, the whispered prophecies, all of them ignite into something far more volatile, a sweeping convergence of realms, a cosmic disturbance that spreads across deserts, mountains, and cities like an unseen storm. The canonical narratives record fragments of this shift in subdued and familiar ways. But the banned books describe something far stranger, far more disorienting. A world flooded with signs, ruptures, and encounters that shattered the illusion of a purely earthly history. In these forbidden texts, the world is not quietly awaiting a spiritual teacher. It is bracing itself for an intervention from beyond the veil, a moment when the ancient cosmic wound would be confronted. The watchers stir. The princes of the nations draw up ancient battle lines. Prophets, mystics, shepherds, and travelers all feel a pull in their dreams, as though the fabric of reality is tightening around a single point. One of the earliest banned manuscripts describing this era is the Scroll of the Dawn Watchers, a text attributed to a desert mystic whose name has been lost to time. According to the Forbidden Scroll, the mystic recorded a series of night watches in which he saw the sky open in flashes of light. These were not stars or planets. They were described as gateways, circular rifts that shimmered with a pale fire. Through the openings he glimpsed strange silhouettes, figures moving with impossible speed, wings that folded like metal, eyes that glowed like coals. He wrote, "They walk between the rays of the heavens, bearing messages of fire. The time draws near." The scroll hints that these beings were heralds, sent to prepare the world for a cosmic event that would realign the realms. Such imagery was too unsettling, too vivid, too reminiscent of Watcher-era contact. The scroll was purged. Another forbidden manuscript from this era, the Book of the Heralds of Light, describes a series of encounters near isolated mountain passes. Shepherds reported hearing voices in the wind, voices not human, not whispering, but resonant, speaking in harmonies that made the air vibrate. Travelers claimed to see figures standing atop cliffs, robed in white, their faces hidden by a blinding glow. These beings, according to the banned text, were not the watchers of old, nor the rebellious spirits of the giants. They were something else, emissaries of the Most High, tasked with stabilizing the boundary between realms as it began to thin. The text describes them sealing breaches, calming storms of spiritual energy, and blocking attempts by dark forces to exploit the weakening veil. Later, theologians considered the text far too cosmic, too chaotic, too direct in describing the heavenly realm's physical interaction with Earth. It was erased. A particularly revealing banned manuscript is the Chronicle of the Desert Signs. This text, attributed to a group of hermits living near the Jordan River, describes a series of celestial phenomena. A star that moved in patterns unlike any celestial object, clouds that formed geometric shapes, voices that echoed through valleys without source, and an overwhelming sense that the realms were touching. The hermits believed these signs marked the approach of a figure foretold in ancient prophecies, one who would traverse both heaven and earth, one whose arrival would ignite a cosmic upheaval. The chronicle describes how the hermits performed rituals meant to prepare themselves for visions, fasting and sleeping on stone floors, waiting for the convergence to fully unfold. Their writings were destroyed by both Roman authorities and religious leaders who considered them dangerous and destabilizing. Yet the most important banned text from this era is the Testament of the Wilderness Prophet, a manuscript that expands dramatically on the figure known in the canon as John the Baptist. In the Forbidden Book, John is not simply a voice crying out in the wilderness. He is described as a seer who saw the realms overlapping, a man who could feel the presence of both heavenly and fallen beings in the air around him. According to the banned text, John spent years in the desert speaking with luminous figures who visited him by night, teaching him that a cosmic intervention was near. He was shown visions of a figure with the face of a man and the radiance of the Most High, walking through realms, opening prison-like chambers, binding rebellious powers, and healing the ancient scar left by the Watcher fall. John's message, according to the Forbidden Manuscript, was more than repentance. It was a warning that the cosmic hierarchy was about to be overturned. His portrayal as a mystic warrior confronting unseen powers was too radical, too supernatural, too destabilizing. The book was banned and nearly lost. Another banned text, the Revelations of the River Gate, describes encounters experienced by fishermen along the Jordan. According to the Forbidden Manuscript, strange lights appeared in the water, illuminating the riverbed with a brightness that resembled daylight. The fishermen heard chanting-like sounds emerging from the currents, voices speaking in languages no human tongue had ever formed. They saw figures walking along the surface of the water, their forms rippling like heat waves, their footsteps leaving no disturbance. The text claims these beings were watchers restored, celestial entities who had remained loyal to the Most High, but had been forbidden to re-enter the earthly realm since the ancient fall. Now, because the convergence was near, they were allowed to appear again. Their task was to witness the arrival of the figure who would heal creation. The manuscript was deemed too fantastical and destroyed. One of the most mysterious forbidden manuscripts of this era is the Scroll of the Luminous Threshold. The text describes a moment when a young girl in a remote village saw a being of brilliant light appear in her home. Unlike the canonical descriptions of angelic messengers, The banned text portrays the being not as a winged figure, but as a shifting sphere of fire and form, something between light and human shape. The being communicated without speech, sending waves of understanding directly into her consciousness. It revealed that a cosmic arrival was near, one that would require her lineage as a conduit. The text claims the girl was shown realms she could barely comprehend, corridors of light, rivers of fire, beings of immense radiance bowing before a central figure whose identity the text refuses to name. Later, editors destroyed this manuscript because it portrayed celestial encounters too literally, too physically, too much like ancient contact narratives. The Testament of the Dreamer, Simeon, another banned text, describes an elderly man in Jerusalem who began to dream of a child surrounded by beings of light. In his dreams, he saw the child lift his hands and cause shadows to flee, saw ancient seals break, saw watchers bound since the flood recoil in terror. The manuscript claims Simeon understood that this child was the convergence point, the one who would embody the union of heaven and earth. But perhaps the most radical aspect of the banned text is that Simeon dreams of fallen beings plotting in secret caverns, conspiring to extinguish the child before he grows. The idea that celestial enemies were aware of and threatened by the arrival of a cosmic figure was too volatile. The testament was destroyed. One of the most haunting banned manuscripts is the Chronicle of the Hidden Realms, a text claiming that certain individuals throughout the ancient world experienced spontaneous visions during this era: Roman soldiers, Persian astrologers, Arab merchants, African seers, Babylonian scribes. The manuscript describes how these unrelated individuals saw the same visions: beings descending in rays of fire, a star splitting open the sky, a child glowing with a hidden light. The chronicle insists these visions were not dreams or metaphors. They were ripples of the convergence, a cosmic event so powerful that it bent time and consciousness across continents. Later editors declared the manuscript too universal, too inclusive, too suggestive of a cosmic unity that threatened institutional boundaries. It was suppressed. The banned Book of the Voice in the Caves recounts events believed to have occurred in the caves near Qumran. According to the forbidden text, a group of Essene scribes recorded hearing a voice that emerged from the depths at night. The voice warned them that ancient beings imprisoned since the Watcher rebellion were stirring, sensing the presence of one who would judge them. The scribes trembled because the voice was not demonic. It was sorrowful. The imprisoned beings cried out not in defiance but in fear, knowing that a cosmic reckoning approached. The scribes hid their writings, knowing the world wasn't ready for such revelations. The manuscript was later destroyed. Equally remarkable is the Scroll of the Mountain Visitors, a banned text describing shepherds near Bethlehem who encountered beings described as columns of fire with human voices. These beings told the shepherds that the convergence had reached its peak, that the figure long foretold had come, and that they were being shown the event because they were keepers of forgotten remembrance. The shepherds were terrified, believing they would die, but the beings reassured them. The radiant visitors sang songs that shook the air, causing stones to vibrate and sheep to fall silent. Later editors considered this account too intense, too reminiscent of ancient Watcher encounters, and thus it was purged. But perhaps the most explosive banned manuscript from this era is the Book of the Celestial Opposition. This text describes how certain celestial beings, called princes of the depths, attempted to stop the convergence by influencing human rulers. The manuscript claims that a Herodian faction became entangled in this conflict, manipulated by forces that feared the arrival of a being capable of healing creation. These princes stirred paranoia, violence, and fear, attempting to extinguish the cosmic arrival before it could mature. The banned text even describes unseen battles occurring over desert regions, flashes of light, shock waves, tremors, interpreted by locals as earthquakes or thunderstorms. Scholars later destroyed the text for suggesting a cosmic conspiracy. The Revelation of the Desert Hermit, another banned manuscript, describes an encounter with a luminous being who revealed the presence of the shining infant. According to the hermit, the being said the child would walk in realms not meant for flesh, speak words that bind the winds, and open gates sealed since the days of Enoch. The hermit claimed he saw visions of the child healing cosmic fractures, closing ancient breaches, and confronting beings who had tormented humanity for ages. He wrote, "The heavens tremble at his coming, and the depths wail at his footsteps." The manuscript was forbidden because it portrayed the child not merely as a teacher or prophet, but as a cosmic repairer, a being whose mission was nothing less than the restoration of creation. As more banned writings from this era surface in fragments, they reveal a staggering picture. The world was vibrating with convergence, and the arrival of a singular luminous figure was the catalyst. The watchers feared him. The loyal angels guarded him. The princes of the nations maneuvered around him. The spirits of the giants recoiled. And humanity, unaware of the cosmic battle unfolding around it, witnessed only pieces of the upheaval. Strange lights, impossible voices, dreams that felt too real, storms that appeared without warning. These forbidden manuscripts make one thing clear: the long war between realms, stretching back to the earliest days of creation, had reached a decisive turning point. The child who entered the world carried within him the potential to heal the ancient wound, break the power of rebellious forces, and realign heaven and earth. The forbidden texts do not describe him directly, some by reverence, others by caution, but they all echo the same truth. Something ancient had awakened, something cosmic had arrived, and the realms would never be the same again. In the banned biblical manuscripts describing the era after the Great Convergence, the era following the arrival of the luminous child, the tone shifts once again. If the earlier forbidden writings trembled with anticipation, awe, and cosmic upheaval, the texts from this next stage pulse with something deeper, more unsettling. They reveal a world in which the two realms no longer run parallel, but instead overlap in unpredictable, destabilizing ways. The forbidden books insist that once the child had entered the world, the ancient boundaries that had separated heaven and earth since the days of the Watchers were permanently altered. The realms were no longer sealed. They touched. They bled into each other. They collided. The canonical narratives stripped down, simplified, and made safe for public consumption present this era as one marked by teachings, miracles, parables, travels, and rising conflict with earthly authorities. But the banned books, those that ecclesiastical councils condemned, locked away, burned, or erased, present an entirely different history. According to them, This was the era in which the ancient cosmic war erupted into the open, as the presence of the Luminous One caused dormant forces to awaken, loyal celestial beings to manifest, and rebellious powers to panic. Every miracle, every confrontation, every parable, every journey was not merely a historical or moral episode. It was the visible tip of an invisible conflict, one raging across dimensions, waged by beings far older than humanity. One of the most striking forbidden manuscripts describing this period is the Book of the 12 Wonders, a text once revered among early desert mystics. According to the banned manuscript, the appearance of the Luminous One caused disturbances not just among humans, but among celestial beings. The book describes watchers who had repented long ago emerging briefly from their hidden sanctuaries to witness him from afar, weeping, for they recognized in him the restoration they had longed for but could never participate in. It describes rebellious entities recoiling at his presence, shrieking in caverns where they had been bound since the flood. It speaks of the Luminous One walking into cities where the air shimmered around him because the unseen realm was bending beneath his steps. Such descriptions were seen as dangerous, too literal, too supernatural, too revealing. The book was destroyed in nearly every tradition. Another banned text, The Revelation of the Two Travelers, presents a startling account of two men who wandered the wilderness near Judea and claimed to see the Luminous One walking alone in the desert at night. According to the forbidden manuscript, his presence caused the sand beneath his feet to glow, as though illuminated by a hidden fire. They saw shapes moving around him, radiant beings whose forms flickered like lightning. The Luminous One spoke to them without voice, conveying messages directly to their minds, telling them that a great conflict had begun. The manuscript claims that these travelers later became wanderers themselves, spreading the message that the world was entering a time of cosmic reckoning. Their writings were burned as heretical. One of the most controversial banned manuscripts from this era is the Scroll of the Boundary Torn, attributed to a temple scribe who encountered the Luminous One in Jerusalem. According to the forbidden text, the scribe was standing near the temple when he felt a rumble beneath the stones. He looked up and saw the Luminous One entering the courtyard. The scribe writes that for a fleeting moment he saw the temple split, not physically, but spiritually. He saw two versions of the temple, the earthly structure of stone and wood, and behind it a shimmering cosmic version made of radiant geometry. The Luminous One walked between the two realms as though they were overlapping layers of reality. When he spoke, both temples vibrated. The scribe fell unconscious, waking hours later with the sense that he had witnessed something impossible. The manuscript was deemed too mystical and destroyed. The forbidden Book of the 7 Confrontations expands the descriptions of his encounters with forces of darkness. In the canonical accounts, these episodes appear as exorcisms, simple, formulaic, almost symbolic. But the banned manuscript describes something far more terrifying. According to the text, when the Luminous One confronted beings called unclean spirits, he was not merely expelling them from individuals. He was waging war against fragments of the Watcher-era corruption that had lingered for millennia. These spirits recognized him not as a teacher or prophet, but as a cosmic authority whose presence signaled their doom. The banned book describes one such confrontation near the cliffs of the Decapolis, where a man inhabited by a legion of spirits ran toward the luminous one. The text claims the air around the man distorted, as though reality itself recoiled from the presence of so much corruption. The spirits shrieked, not in fear of punishment, but in fear of recognition. They knew who he was. The luminous one spoke a word, and the spirits fled into the earth like shadows sucked into a labyrinth. The manuscript was banned for its dramatic, cosmic portrayal. Another shocking banned text is the Chronicle of the Veiled Storm, which describes a moment when the luminous one calmed the Sea of Galilee. The canonical story depicts this as a miracle of faith, but the forbidden manuscript portrays it as a cosmic intervention. According to the banned text, the storm was not natural. It was caused by a rebellious celestial prince attempting to strike the luminous one as he crossed the water. The prince stirred winds, waves, and lightning, bending the elements against him. But when the luminous one stood and spoke, the storm collapsed instantly, not because the weather obeyed him, but because the prince himself recoiled in terror and retreated into the depths. Such implications of cosmic warfare reflected in earthly weather were too destabilizing. The manuscript was destroyed. Yet another banned writing, The Vision of the Syro-Phoenician Woman, describes an encounter that the canonical text reduces to a few verses. In the forbidden manuscript, the woman seeking healing for her daughter sees something no one else sees. When the luminous one approaches, she not only falls at his feet, but sees a vast, luminous being overshadowing him. A presence so radiant she cannot look directly at it. She understands instinctively that the one she addresses is both human and more than human. The banned text suggests that she saw the cosmic nature of the luminous one more clearly than many of his closest followers. The Church later suppressed this text because it implied a revelation impossible to contain within doctrine. Perhaps the most explosive banned manuscript from this era is the Book of the Hidden Years, which describes periods of the luminous one's life that the canonical texts remain silent about. According to the forbidden writings, during his youth and early adulthood he was repeatedly visited by celestial beings who taught him mysteries of creation, the nature of the realms, the history of the Watchers, and the truth of the ancient cosmic wound. The banned book claims he traveled to remote deserts, mountains, and abandoned temples where he confronted remnants of the Watcher influence, entities bound in chains, spirits lurking in desolate places, echoes of ancient rebellions. He learned the nature of the corruption he would later heal. These accounts were considered too mystical, too supernatural, too dangerous. The manuscript was destroyed. Another banned text, the Testament of the Seven Witnesses, describes encounters experienced by individuals who followed the luminous one from a distance. According to the forbidden manuscript, these witnesses saw his form shift at times, as though the veil between human and cosmic natures flickered. They saw him speak to beings invisible to others. They saw him walk through crowds that seemed unable to touch him. They saw him stand on mountains where the air shimmered, as though another world overlapped with theirs. They saw him confront forces that manifested as storms, shadows, or tremors. The witnesses wrote down what they saw, but their accounts were suppressed to maintain a more reasonable narrative. One of the most mysterious forbidden manuscripts is the Scroll of the Radiant Mountain, describing an event that the canonical Gospels briefly mention. the Transfiguration. But what the banned text records is far more dramatic. According to the manuscript, when the luminous one ascended the mountain with 3 companions, the peak split, not physically but dimensionally. The realm above cleaved through the realm below. The witnesses saw him standing in a space where both realities overlapped. 2 ancient figures appeared, beings who had entered the heavenly realm centuries earlier. They spoke with him, not about earthly matters, but about the cosmic task he had come to complete. The mountain glowed from within, as though lit by the architecture of the unseen world. The companions collapsed in fear. The manuscript was destroyed for its overtly supernatural portrayal. The banned manuscripts also expand upon the confrontations between the luminous one and earthly powers. According to the forbidden book of the Prince of the Air, the Roman Empire was not merely a political force. It was influenced by a celestial prince who sought control over the earth. When the luminous one began his public work, this prince recognized the threat and stirred rulers, priests, and armies to act against him. The banned text claims that the trial and condemnation of the luminous one were not mere political events. They were the earthly manifestation of a cosmic confrontation. The manuscript was condemned for suggesting that empires themselves were influenced by celestial beings. The most haunting forbidden book from this era is the revelation of the earthquake at the Veil. The canonical account describes an earthquake occurring at the death of the luminous one, but the banned text describes the event in cosmic terms. According to the forbidden manuscript, when the luminous one breathed his last, the boundary between the realms ruptured violently. The earth shook not because of geological forces, but because the cosmic wound was being pierced. The veil of the temple tore not from top to bottom by coincidence, but as a physical manifestation of a rupture in the architecture of creation. The rebellious beings cried out, for they felt the tearing as a blow. The faithful celestial beings rejoiced, for the wound that had existed since the days of the Watchers was now opening to be healed. The manuscript was considered too metaphysical and was destroyed. Another banned text, the Book of the 3 Descents, describes the luminous one's journey after death. According to the forbidden manuscript, he descended not only into the realm of the dead, but into 3 distinct layers of reality: the realm of the forgotten spirits, the realm of the chained watchers, and the realm of the cosmic breach. In each realm, he confronted powers that had influenced the world for millennia. He shattered ancient seals, freed captives, and bound rebellious entities. The text describes him walking through realms of darkness that recoiled from his light, realms where echoes of the pre-flood corruption still lingered. The manuscript was burned as heresy. The banned Chronicle of the Empty Tomb describes a moment when celestial beings appeared not only at the tomb, but across the landscape. Mountains glowed with internal fire, caverns shook, storms dissipated instantly. For 3 days the boundary between worlds was fluid, dissolving, reforming, dissolving again. The manuscript claims that multiple individuals witnessed strange figures walking the hills at dawn, their forms shifting as though made of starlight. Such cosmic depictions were removed. A final forbidden book from this era, the Scroll of the Ascending Fire, describes the luminous one rising through the realms after his resurrection. According to the banned manuscript, as he rose, rebellious entities tried to strike him, but they dissolved upon touching his radiance. The loyal angels sang a song that shook the heavens. The realms realigned behind him. For the first time since the days of the Watchers, the cosmic wound began to heal. Taken together, these forbidden manuscripts reveal a picture radically different from the canonical narrative. A picture not of a simple religious episode, but of a cosmic restoration, a confrontation between ancient beings, a healing of wounds inflicted at the dawn of history. These banned books insist that the Luminous One was not merely a teacher or prophet. He was the hinge of creation, the repairer of cosmic fractures, the one whose presence forced every realm to reveal itself. And they insist that after his intervention, the world was forever changed. In the final layer of the banned biblical manuscripts, those few surviving whispers of a secret archive suppressed for centuries, the tone shifts once more. No longer is the narrative shaped by anticipation, eruption, or cosmic confrontation. Instead, these forbidden writings speak with a strange and chilling clarity. The war between realms did not end with the Luminous One's resurrection. It changed form. It became subtler, deeper, more psychological, more woven into the fabric of human history itself. The forbidden texts claim that after the cosmic restoration began, the realms did not separate again as before. The boundary remained permeable, thinned, reshaped, rewired. And humanity became the battleground of memory, knowledge, and allegiance. The canonical writings conclude with letters, visions, and the early spread of a faith. But the banned books paint a wider, more unsettling panorama. They reveal that after the Luminous One's ascension, celestial and fallen beings entered a new phase of their conflict, not through open manifestations, but through influence on nations, movements, technologies, and revelations. The forbidden manuscripts insist that history did not calm after the convergence. Instead, it accelerated toward a destiny encoded long before the earth was shaped. One of the most revealing banned manuscripts from this era is the Book of the Silent Heavens, a text attributed to a disciple who lived decades after the Luminous One's departure. According to this forbidden book, the disciple began experiencing visions of realms that had been altered by the cosmic healing. He wrote that certain celestial prisons, those forged after the Watcher Rebellion, had weakened. Not because the beings inside had grown strong, but because their purpose had been fulfilled. Some rebellious entities were judged and dissolved entirely. Others were relocated to deeper realms, where they could no longer influence humanity. But some, described as the Whisperers, were allowed limited movement, not to torment humanity, but to reveal their own corruption for judgment. This portrayal of celestial ecosystems was too complex, too metaphysical, too contrary to institutional doctrine. The book was banned and burned. Another forbidden text, the Chronicle of the Returning Fires, describes luminous beings appearing sporadically in the early generations of the movement started by the Luminous One's followers. According to the banned manuscript, these beings did not act as guardians or warriors anymore. They acted as instructors, teaching individuals with visions how to perceive the subtle interplay of realms. The Chronicle claims that certain early followers could sense when realms overlapped, when shadows moved behind political events, when cosmic decisions echoed through the affairs of empires. These individuals, described as the Watchers reborn in obedience, served as intermediaries between the new covenant and the unseen world. The manuscript was destroyed because it portrayed spiritual perception as a continuation of ancient cosmic roles, dangerously undermining ecclesiastical control. The Forbidden Book of the Traveler. John, unrelated to the canonical Apocalypse, contains a series of journeys taken by a visionary wandering across the Mediterranean world. He describes encountering strange phenomena in cities shaped by the luminous one's influence. In Corinth, he sees a shimmering presence standing over the marketplace, observing merchants and travelers. In Smyrna, he hears a voice singing from the sea at midnight, a voice he later identifies as belonging to a celestial being guarding the community. In Antioch, he feels the ground tremble, not from an earthquake, but from a shift in the deep realm beneath the city. The text suggests that certain locations became thin places where the realms brushed against each other after the cosmic restoration, producing phenomena that early believers interpreted as miracles or visions. Later editors feared these accounts would encourage mysticism and rebellion. The manuscript was erased. Perhaps the most unsettling banned manuscript from this era is the Scroll of the Divided Nations, attributed to a prophet of the 2nd century. According to this forbidden text, the nations of the world, once governed by celestial princes as described in earlier apocryphal writings, experienced a dramatic shift after the luminous one's cosmic victory. Some princes, recognizing the new order, relinquished their influence and departed. Others resisted, retreating into deeper realms to plot subtle forms of influence. Still others formed alliances, either loyal or rebellious, based on the trajectories of emerging civilizations. The scroll claims that geopolitical movements across centuries were not random, but reflections of celestial alignments. The idea that nations rose or fell based on cosmic battles was too threatening to political and theological powers. The scroll was condemned. Equally remarkable is the Forbidden Testament of the Shining Servants, which describes a group of individuals scattered across the ancient world who received visions from luminous beings. According to the text, these servants were given knowledge that the cosmic restoration was not complete. They were told that humanity now bore the responsibility to maintain the repaired boundary between realms, not through rituals or sacrifices, but through justice, humility, truthfulness, and self-control. They were warned that rebellion, oppression, corruption, and violence would destabilize the healed architecture of creation, inviting shadows to re-enter. The Testament describes visions of cities where injustice caused a dark mist to gather above the roofs, and visions of communities where compassion caused luminous threads to connect people to realms of light. The text implies that morality was now cosmic architecture. This idea was too mystical and too morally radical. The book was banned. The Forbidden Book of the 4 Watchposts goes even further. According to this banned manuscript, after the cosmic convergence, 4 watchposts were established at the edges of the earth. Not physical locations, but spiritual anchors where celestial beings monitored the stability of the healed realms. The text describes these watchposts as nodes in a cosmic network that helped maintain the separation between realities while allowing for regulated interaction. It continues by describing times when these watchposts flickered or dimmed due to human cruelty, war, or widespread deception. When such dimming occurred, breaches opened, small at first, then widening into disturbances that manifested as plagues, storms, or social upheaval. The manuscript was suppressed because it implied that cosmic stability depended on collective human behavior. One of the most astonishing banned writings is the Chronicle of the Hidden Ones, describing a community in the Judean desert whose members devoted themselves to understanding the new cosmic order. According to the forbidden account, these individuals meditated in caves, forests, and mountains until they perceived the shapes of realms overlapping with the earth. They wrote that at times they saw luminous pathways stretching across deserts like rivers of fire, and at other times they saw shadowy knots where corruption attempted to re-enter the world. They believed they were guardians of the repaired boundary, tasked with interceding when breaches occurred. The community was eventually wiped out by Roman forces, and their scrolls were destroyed by authorities who feared their cosmic implications. Another forbidden manuscript, the Book of the Great Unsealing, describes visions experienced by an unnamed seer who lived during a period of political instability. According to the banned text, the luminous one appeared to the seer in a dream, holding a sealed object glowing with internal fire. He explained that the seals represented cosmic structures that had been altered by his death and resurrection. The seer was shown that only some of these seals had been opened. Others would open across millennia, each one unleashing both renewal and upheaval. The text describes future ages as cycles of convergence, periods when realms draw near and humanity is tested. The Church rejected the manuscript as too apocalyptic and too tied to cosmic determinism. The banned Testament of the Last Witness claims that near the end of his life, one of the Luminous One's closest followers received visions describing the long arc of human history after the cosmic healing. According to the forbidden text, he saw that humanity would eventually forget the cosmic war, forget the Watchers, forget the giants, forget the luminous child, and forget the architecture of creation itself. He saw entire civilizations rise and fall without ever understanding that their destinies were intertwined with celestial realms. He saw ages of darkness where the influence of rebellious entities subtly re-entered through deception, pride, and violence. But he also saw ages of light where compassion, truth, and justice strengthened the repaired cosmos. The manuscript suggests that human choices would determine how quickly the final restoration arrived. This dynamic view of cosmic history was deemed heretical and suppressed. One of the most intriguing banned manuscripts is the Scroll of the Coming Night and Morning, a text describing visions in which the seer experiences two overlapping futures. In one future, humanity embraces justice, humility, and unity, causing luminous beings to walk openly among them. In this timeline, the realms merge peacefully, restoring creation to its intended harmony. In the other future, humanity succumbs to violence, greed, and arrogance, causing shadows to swell and breaches to appear. In that timeline, a second cosmic confrontation becomes inevitable, a confrontation not to destroy creation, but to finalize its healing through fire. The scroll was condemned for its dualistic, prophetic nature. The Forbidden Book of the Returning King is perhaps the most theologically explosive manuscript in the entire banned corpus. According to this text, the Luminous One did not simply ascend and remain absent. He continues to move between realms, guiding the cosmic restoration. The book describes him appearing as a radiant figure on mountain peaks, in visions and in dreams, not as a preacher or warrior, but as a cosmic architect. He is depicted repairing fractures in the fabric of reality, strengthening the boundary where needed and thinning it where healing is required. The book concludes with a prophecy. When the final breach opens, when the realms converge one last time, he will walk upon the earth as fire and flesh, restoring creation to its origin. This direct connection between cosmic architecture and eschatological expectation was too destabilizing for the early church. The book was obliterated. Another banned writing, The Revelation of the Four Seas, describes visions of future civilizations, empires that will rise with technologies resembling the structures of the heavenly realms, nations that will explore realms beyond Earth without understanding what lies behind the veil, and an age when humanity stands on the brink of rediscovering the forbidden knowledge of the Watcher era. The text warns that as human capability increases, the boundary between realms will thin again, either by divine design or by human recklessness. The manuscript ends with a chilling vision of a world where humanity builds towers of light, engines of fire, and vessels that pierce the heavens, rekindling memories of Babel, but this time on a cosmic scale. The Church destroyed the manuscript for its futuristic and apocalyptic content. The final forbidden manuscript worth mentioning is the Chronicle of the Final Alignment. According to this text, creation will one day reach a moment when the realms align perfectly, the first time since before the Watcher Rebellion. In that moment, all beings, celestial, human, and rebellious, will be revealed in their true form. The luminous one will stand at the center of all realms, not as judge alone, but as healer. The ancient wound will be closed forever. The watchers who repented will be restored. The rebellious entities will be dissolved like shadows before the sun. Humanity will become what it was always meant to be: a bridge between the realms, a steward of creation, a partner in the cosmic order. All these forbidden manuscripts, scattered across centuries, burned by councils, suppressed by empires, and erased by tradition, whisper the same final truth. The story is not about ancient times or lost civilizations. It is about a cosmic history that continues into the present, a war that became an equilibrium, a wound that became a path, a convergence that became a destiny. The banned books insist that creation is still unfolding, still healing, still moving toward its final alignment. And in that final moment, whenever it comes, the realms will open once more.